Okay, now let's go really crazy. I've had enough of only being half crazy. Let's do the bloody lot, eh? What I want to say before I go into this is this. One of the most profound ways that people are controlled is to limit their sense of possibility. Your sense of possibility becomes your sense of what is possible. Now, that's an obvious thing, and it's a truism, but often we miss what's in front of our eyes. In other words, if you can program a sense of what's possible and make it narrow and incredibly limited, then when people come along and say, this is going on, these people say, you're bloody mad, that's not possible, is it? No, you don't believe it's possible. Talking to some of the insiders that I have over the years, and talking to other people who've done the same, there is a feeling among some of them that these entities, technologically, and I keep emphasizing, there's not that many of them compared with humans, and so therefore they have to keep out of sight, and it's one of the reasons, the major reason they want to cull the global population, because it's out of hand from their point of view. Well, stick around, it's going to be out of hand a bit more very soon. But they reckon, some of them, that this technology that these people are working with, these entities are working with, is like 10,000 years ahead of where we are. But that's a bit of a misnomer, because there's a line, like a Rubicon, of awareness of how reality works. And when you're this side of it, you are in a state of tremendous limitation. But once you cross it, by realizing the nature of reality that I've been talking about today, suddenly you can move very fast in terms of your ability and your potential and all the rest of it. But while we're here, they reckon they're about 10,000 years ahead. So we're dealing not with what we can do, but with what very advanced technological entities will do. Not spiritually advanced, intellectually, technologically advanced. What happened was that I was writing this latest book, and I sat down one morning. I've had one or two thoughts about this before, but they've come and gone. But I sat down one morning at the computer to start writing, and it was like, I've had this so many times in my life, in the last 20 years. It was like an energy field descends upon me, and suddenly I just knew the moon was not what it seems to be. It wasn't the heavenly body, the natural phenomenon that we believe that it is. And from that moment, information started to come to me in the five-sense world, pointing to exactly that. Again, we come back to that line 20 years ago. Knowledge will be put into his mind, and at other times he will be led to knowledge. This combination has been constantly repeating, and it gets more and more powerful. First I get an insight out of nowhere, the moon's not real, where's that come from? And then suddenly it starts. I went on the internet, and within 2-3 minutes, I was expecting to find nothing. I just put on a few words indicating the moon's not real in the sense that we think it is. And bingo, within 2-3 minutes or less, I'd found this book, Who Built the Moon, by two researchers who've written other books. One of them an investigation into Freemasonry. And this book details the extraordinary anomalies relating to the moon. And they came to the conclusion, and I absolutely bloody agree with them, and a bit more than that too, as I'll come to later, that this is what we're looking at. The geometrical connections and everything, and the mathematics and the relationship between them in terms of size and position is just mind-blowing. And what I'm suggesting, and I'm not alone over the years at this level of it, though I think I might be alone at the next bit, that I'll come to in a second, or a few minutes. I've been there before, I don't mind. Is that the moon is actually a hollowed-out planetoid. So in Who Built the Moon, like I say, I do recommend it, the way it looks at the anomalies and everything, and the connections between these three bodies. And these mathematical, geometrical connections only apply to these three bodies in the solar system. They don't play out against the other planets, just these three. And the moon is so perfectly positioned that because of where it is, when we have an eclipse, it is the same size as the sun. That's why we have the eclipse. And the authors of Who Built the Moon say this: the moon is bigger than it should be, apparently older than it should be, and much lighter in mass than it should be. It occupies an unlikely orbit and is so extraordinary that all existing explanations for its presence are fraught with difficulties, and none of them could be considered remotely watertight. When you go on and you say, where'd the moon come from, you get this story. And like so much in what we call science, that people take it as fact, it's actually a theory which repeated becomes fact. But then you go back and you find that it's a theory. And the first one is the moon was created by what's known as the Whack theory, or the Big Whack theory. And that is that a Mars-type planet came in, smacked the Earth, great chunk came off, and became the moon. When the physics of that didn't work out, they came up with the Double Whack theory, where the Mars-type planet hit the Earth, bit comes off or whatever, and then the Mars-type planet thinks, well, I'll give him one with the right, I'll give you one with the left, comes back and whacks it again, the old 1-2. Talk about bloody desperate. And the truth is, and honest scientists will tell you, they have no bloody clue where the moon come from, and it shouldn't, by physics, be there. This guy, Isaac Asimov, a Russian professor of biochemistry, did a lot of writing on this sort of stuff, and he said this, quite rightly: we cannot help but come to the conclusion that the moon by rights ought not to be there. The fact that it is one of those strokes of luck almost too good to accept. Small planets such as Earth, with weak gravitational fields, might well lack satellites. In general, then, when a planet does have satellites, those satellites are much smaller than the planet itself. Therefore, even if the Earth has a satellite, there would be every reason to suspect that at best it would be a tiny world, perhaps 30 miles in diameter. But that is not so. Earth not only has a satellite, but it is a giant satellite, 2,160 miles in diameter. How is it then that that tiny Earth has one? Amazing. Some scientists don't even talk about a planet-satellite relationship, but a planet-planet relationship. The moon's bigger than Pluto. The best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist, that scientist said. Another one from NASA: it seems easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence. And then we get the hollow moon. This is what I'm saying, and others have said, is that it's a hollowed-out planetoid. In November 1969, the moon was hit by a lunar module to the equivalent of 1 ton of TNT. The shock waves built up, and NASA scientists said the moon rang like a bell. Maurice Ewing, a co-director of the seismic experiment, told the news conference, "As for the meaning of it, I'd rather not make an interpretation right now, but it is as though someone had struck a bell, say in the belfry of a church, a single blow, and found that the reverberation from it continued for 30 minutes. It got a bigger smack eventually, which I'll come to. Frank Press from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, said that for a rather small impact to produce an effect that lasted for 30 minutes was quite beyond the range of our experience. This is a guy called Gordon MacDonald. He said in the early 1960s, it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere. And this guy from MIT said the lunar orbiter experiments had vastly improved knowledge of the moon's gravitational field and indicated the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow. Now we'll come to this bigger whack. A launch vehicle struck the moon with the equivalent of 11 tons of TNT, and NASA scientists said the moon reacted like a gong and continued to vibrate for 3 hours and 20 minutes to a depth of up to 25 miles. Ken Johnson, a supervisor of the data, and NASA scientists said the moon reacted like a gong and continued to vibrate for 3 hours and 20 minutes to a depth of up to 25 miles. Ken Johnson, a supervisor of the Data and Photo Control Department during the Apollo missions, told Who Built the Moon author Alan Butler that the moon not only rang like a bell, but the whole moon wobbled in such a precise way that it was almost as though it had gigantic hydraulic damper struts inside it. These two Russian scientists from the Soviet Academy of Scientists wrote an article in 1970 in Sputnik magazine in Russia headed, "Is the Moon the Creation of an Alien Intelligence?" And all these years later, it indicates to the fact that they were right. What they point out, and others point out, is the outer surface of the moon is extremely hard and contains minerals like titanium. Moon rocks have been found to contain processed metals, including brass and mica, and the elements uranium-236 and neptunium-237 that have never been found to occur naturally. Uranium-236 is a long-lived radioactive nuclear waste and is found in spent nuclear fuel and reprocessed uranium. Neptunium-237 is a radioactive metallic element and a byproduct of nuclear reactors and the production of plutonium. Some lunar rocks have been found to contain 10 times more titanium than titanium-rich rocks on Earth. Titanium is used in supersonic jets, deep-diving submarines and spacecraft. Dr. Harold Urey, the winner of the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, said he was terribly puzzled by the rocks from the moon and in particular their titanium content. He said the samples were mind-blowers and that he could not account for the titanium. The two Russian scientists said in their article, if a material had to be devised to protect a giant artificial satellite from the unfavorable effects of temperature, from the cosmic radiation and meteorite bombardment, the experts would probably have hit upon precisely these refractory metals. Refractory metals are incredibly resistant to heat and wear. In that case, is it not clear why lunar rock is such an extraordinarily poor heat conductor, a factor which so amazed the astronauts? Wasn't that what the designers of this super Sputnik of the Earth were after? From the engineer's point of view, this spaceship of ages long past, which we call the Moon, is superbly constructed. They say it's a hollowed-out planetoid, and they say if you're going to launch an artificial Sputnik, then it is advisable to make it hollow. At the same time, it would be naive to imagine that anyone capable of such a tremendous space project would be satisfied simply with some kind of giant empty chunk hurled into a near-Earth trajectory. It is more likely that what we have here is a very ancient spaceship, the interior of which was filled with fuel for the engines and materials and appliances for repair work, navigation instruments, observation equipment, and all manner of machinery. In other words, everything necessary to enable this caravel of the universe to serve as a Noah's Ark, appropriate, of intelligence, perhaps even as the home of a whole civilization, envisaging a prolonged thousands of millions of years existence and long wanderings through space, thousands of millions of miles. Naturally, the hull of such a spaceship must be super tough in order to stand up to the blows of meteorites and sharp fluctuations between extreme heat and extreme cold. Probably the shell is a double-layered affair. The basis is a dark armouring of about 20 miles in thickness, and outside of it some kind of more loosely packed covering, a thinner layer averaging about 3 miles. In certain areas where the lunar seas and craters are, the upper layer is quite thin, in some cases non-existent. And as this scientist said, the moon is made inside out. In other words, what's on the outside should really be on the inside, and that supports the idea of a hollowed-out planetoid.